Two swords clash in a heated battle. Someone calls out that more goblins are headed that way. The battle rages on. The fighters cannot believe that one of their teammates is losing in the head of battle, and they ask him to work harder to stop them. Tanks are also asked to move to the front. They have to maintain formation and they are told to stay focused. The soldiers are in the wrong place and they need to fight if they don't want to die before the fight even begins. The soldiers yell that they do not want to do that. Meanwhile, a very suspicious hooded figure lifts the black hood from his head. The fighting rages on between the soldiers and the goblins and it raises a large cloud of smoke. The soldier turns to the necromancer, who is the hooded figure, and asks him to help as he promised. Then he kindly asks if that will be possible for the necromancer. The necromancer is feeling pretty smug about his abilities. He says that he could assist. After all, he is here as a mercenary, and he whips out his skeleton staff with pride. The skull on the staff calls out for power to come. He waves his hand and a wave of purple aura summons skeletons with weapons that march into battle. The skeletons launch at the goblins, and the fight resumes, with the bones fighting against the deadly green monsters. One of the soldiers watched in awe at the necromancer, which was said to be the strongest authority lately. They had never expected to see the necromancer in action in an E-rank dungeon like this. He would be a ranker for sure if he awakened. They knew the party leader was too relaxed, but they could not believe that a super powerful necromancer was the reason, and they wondered how their leader had been able to recruit someone as strong as that. That was it. The status befitting the unique authority, necromancer. The protagonist chuckled snugly, but there was nothing but death and disappointment in his eyes. Among the 7.9 billion people, only 1,000 people have it, a very rare profession. An army of marching skeletons glowing purple. However, summon an ordinary skeleton. The bone had 1 E-rank who used a sword. Bone had 2 E-rank that wielded a staff. Bone had 3 E-rank who wielded an arrow. That's right, the necromancer was, in fact, an irregular necromancer. He was the skeleton necromancer, the most basic among basic summons for a necromancer. The soldiers wondered why their super powerful necromancer was only summoning skeletons. The soldiers guessed it was because their super powerful higher obviously felt that an E-rank dungeon could be dealt with using only skeletons. The soldiers were so impressed that they even vocalized how jealous they were of his super awesome powers. Our guy could not believe that those ignorant buffoons were somehow jealous of his unholy bad luck. His name was Joo Dong-hoon, and his profession was that he worked as a cursed necromancer. His rank was E, and he was the one who controlled the souls of the dead, a necromancer. However, none of these satisfied our guy. He was supposedly supposed to overpower enemies using frightening spirits and poisons. However, he had been cursed. Joo Dong-hoon could somehow only summon skeletons. He was the lamest of all lame necromancers. He was the one jealous of those guys. Around 10 years ago, humans began to receive unique abilities from the moment they turned adults at 20 years old. People walked around in the street, chilling and casually living their lives. The contents of the unique authorities were completely random. Some received authorities related to blacksmithing or sewing, while others received auxiliary authorities such as exploration, healing, or buffing. It was a roll of a dice to see what a person's ability would be. Since these abilities were all just given based on luck, not everyone felt great about it. Still, thanks to these abilities, people were able to survive the invasion of monsters. However, in any case, our guy became a necromancer that everyone was envious of. His 3 skeletons, Bones 1, Bones 2, and Bones 3, stood proudly over the corpses of their conquered goblins. The soldiers cheered with joy at their victory. Meanwhile, the necromancer stewed and groaned at the back. His growth stunted to where he could only summon E-rank skeletons until the day he died. So, he had become the E-rank dungeon hyper-carry. Later that day, our guy informed his team leader that he was done with the work for that day. The team leader was happy as well as impressed. The main character reported that he had indeed completed the E-rank dungeon party mercenary job and the report as well. He would be going now, and the team leader said that they would see him later. The necromancer sighed heavily about what a world it was. He wished that at least his skills would be so trash that people would not have expectations of him. However, he ended up with a skill that was halfway decent but not good enough. Now, the MC was stuck with hope for nothing, and it would be better if he had at least gotten a production type ability. However, no such luck in that, and all his skeletons were warriors. Even after becoming a necromancer, his pay for that day after running the dungeon was only 40,000 won. A part-time job would likely pay more, and the filled necromancer had to sigh at the waste of time. Still, since this was the only thing that he actually wanted to do, so he could not give up on it either. Suddenly, an announcement came on about the good news of that day. The good news was that the Dark Lord, who succeeded in clearing the lunar rifts last time, had become a ranker in just 3 years of being active. With that, South Korea officially had 37 rankers. They were only second behind the United States in the world, which was considered amazing. It was also the first time a hunter had become a ranker in just 3 years. Of course, that excludes the original hunters. It just goes to show just how powerful the authority of being a necromancer is. The news announcer laughed that it was true. They were glad that their country had a necromancer to call their own. The main character stares up in shock and then grits his teeth in anger because that was the thing that was driving him even more mad. That guy, who received his authority on the same day as our guy, was busy flourishing as a necromancer while Dong-hoon was busy suffering. Although they had received their powers on the same day, one of them was a cursed necromancer that could only summon skeletons until the day he died, and the other was already a recognized ranker. The situation was beyond frustrating, and our dude burned with hatred as he wondered how it was possible. After calming down for a second, he continued his stroll back to his place. The night was quiet and he seemed to be the only one in the area he stepped into. Our dude wiped the sweat from his brow as he acknowledged that it was possible. It was already a reality. Just because he could only summon skeletons did not mean that he could resent reality and sit still without even trying. So, Dong-hoon stepped out into a training center and he called his skeletons out to play. He used his special skill to summon an ordinary skeleton and the three popped out with their lance, sword and bow respectively. The first effect of his superordinary power was to consume 10 energy to summon the ordinary skeleton. He could summon up to 10 at once. The second effect of his rather inconvenient power was that he could name each individual skeleton. Dong-hoon had been genuinely surprised when he read that he could name the skeletons, and he had smiled, thinking that he had not seen a skill with such a description. He had thought back then that this meant it was something special and different. Of course, the MC had just been delusional back then. Tossing aside that painful memory, he stepped forward and happily greeted the skeletons before him, saying that it was great to see them again. He told them to take care of their weak tendons, and all the skeletons turned to face him. It was almost like they could understand him. He always got the same skeletons whenever he summoned them. The one with the huge sword and purple eyes was Bony One. He had the opportunity to give them names, so of course he made the names as lousy as possible. Lousy names for a lousy power. Bony 2 with golden eyes wielded a long spear, and Bony 3 with green eyes wielded the bow. It was time for them to train and our guy planned on being strict. Watching his boneheads train was our guy putting in the effort. The training involved having his skeletons practice their skills against the equipment he set up in the woods. At first, he had seen some results from doing that. The skeletons had previously struggled when fighting against goblins, but now they could easily handle 3 at once. Unfortunately, that was all they could accomplish and E-ranked remained E-ranked still. No matter how much harsher their training became, and even if the MC got a C-rank teacher for them, they did not become any stronger than that. Our guy sighed about his very pathetic and sad life, but there was nothing else that he could do about it outside of mope. Some have said that someone living without a dream is more pitiful than someone holding a dream that could never be fulfilled. Suddenly, there was some deep and dangerous breathing from the grass in the surrounding area. Dong-hoon whipped his head around in shock and his eyes widened in horror to see the large footfall of a great beast. A beast with green skin and very sharp and large tusks. The creature grunted and the necromancer was appalled to see an orc on his training ground. He could not imagine what that kind of beast could possibly be doing there. Bonehead 1 was suppressed by the presence of a strong being. All stats were reduced by 20%. Bonehead 2 was also unfortunately suppressed, and so was Bonehead 3. The necromancer was even more appalled than before at how useless his boneheads were. The fact that an orc was here meant that there was a dungeon break in a nearby dungeon. A dungeon break is a phenomenon where a dungeon that has not been cleared enough breaks and lets monsters outside of the dungeon. The orc raised its huge weapon with deadly intent, and Dong-hoon watched in fear, cursing and thinking he did not want to die here. He yelled for his skeletons to block the attack with all of his might and intent, and the axe came swinging down. Surprisingly enough, Bonehead 1 did raise his sword. But a fat lot of good it did because they got blasted away almost instantly. Bonehead 1 and 2 were unsummoned immediately and the necromancer began to panic. The MC cursed as the orc began to charge at him and he turned tail and ran with all of his might. The bonehead with the spear was still on the ground and he launched it, managing to hit the orc on the head. Our guy was shocked but praised Bony 3 for standing up for him, begging it to do something significant. Even with this shitty life, Dong-hoon still desperately wanted to live. He had 70 energy remaining, which meant that he could still summon 7 more boneheads. Quickly, he activated his skill to summon even more boneheads using his skill to summon ordinary skeletons. Bonehead 1 and Bonehead 2 got summoned again, and our guy commanded them to be the tanks so that Bony 3 could attack from behind. The orc grunted and growled in protest as he got attacked, and our guy stared in concern as his skeletons got whacked. Bony 1 took an axe to the head that cleaved him in half, but no matter how many times he got cut down, Dong-hoon would summon him again and again. He wondered how many minutes had already passed, gasping and panting for breath. He coughed out from exhaustion, and the orc growled. Our guy had finally consumed all of this energy. The blue page asked if he wanted to refill his energy and try resting. However, resting was absolutely not an option in this situation. His fingers curled into a shaky fist, but he still stood with the skeletons as they faced the orc. The orc growled, unimpressed by their continuous fight, and our guy wondered if this would truly be the end of his life. Suddenly, he got a notice that he should check the condition achievement message. The Mick had noticed something like that pop up some time ago, but he was not in a position to check that right now. Wait, but this thing said that he had unlocked a unique ability which was called the Cursed Necromancer's Unique Hidden Condition. The condition was the 10,000 uses rule. Our guy was stunned when he suddenly got wrapped by a bright golden light. incredible effort was required to upgrade his unique ability, and that effort involved using the skill to summon ordinary skeletons 10,000 times. Now, he got a congratulations message, and his rank would be increased to a D rank. The reward connected to the rank increase would soon arrive. Dong-hoon did not have time for the suspense as he was genuinely in a life or death battle, and he yelled at the system to hurry up. He would take anything. The orc growled as he raced to attack once more. Meanwhile, the MC's energy was refilled. The skill to summon ordinary skeletons has been upgraded to D rank. The skeletons suddenly were covered in a golden glow, and Bonehead with the sword gripped his weapon tighter. Suddenly, the orc swung and the skeleton raised his sword to block the attack. Amazingly, Boney's strength had become completely different and our guy's enemy was also refreshed, so he was feeling pumped about trying out his new skill. He summoned a skeleton using his new skill, consuming 10 energy. The boneheads were summoned. The main weapons of the new skeletons were selected and out popped a violet-eyed skeleton with a shield, another skeleton with ruby eyes and a staff with a glowing purple gem. The necromancer was impressed that his skeletons could get weapons like that. They were a tank and a mage at that. The orc noticed more skeletons getting summoned and the news guys somehow made a rounded party with Boney 1, Boney 2, and Boney 3. The shield skeleton got ready and charged right at the orc fighting Boney 1 and 2. The orc was surprised to see them approaching as it was currently occupied. Without hesitation, the orc attacked the shield skeleton. However, the shield skeleton was strong enough to knock the axe right out of the orc's hand. The orc was shocked at losing his weapon. Suddenly, there was a huge explosion in the sky and the orc looked up to see that the mage skeleton had cast a fireball. The orc could not believe the sudden onslaught as it was attacked left and right by the other skeletons. Our dude watched speechless. The skeletons had defeated a strong orc for the first time, and the MC stared in awe. He had thought that his life was screwed. However, he grinned with joy at the realization that the world did not want him dead yet. The necromancer happily slurped up a bowl of ramen. Staring at his status window, he could not believe it. The hunter Joo Dong-hoon had been upgraded to a D-class necromancer. He had never expected that his abilities would be the kind that could grow. This was all the motivation that he needed and suddenly he was all fired up. Effort had to be rewarded and there was no doubt about it. Although the MC did not know when he would be able to reach C rank. But still, he was still happy that he was able to upgrade at all. He happily slurped his ramen as he noted that he needed to go back to the basics. The power of an intermediate skeleton was impressive enough. He wondered what would happen if those skeletons somehow got even stronger. The main character wondered if the mage Boney 5 would soon be spamming Blizzard Storm attacks and if Boney 1 and 2 would become a sword master and spear master respectively. Alright, at any rate, Joo Dong-hoon was pumped and he was ready to kick into gear. When he walked into work the next day, he heard his colleagues mumbling about a job that could be troublesome. Aside from the insurance premium, they were not sure if the hazard pay could cover the necessities. The MC paused for a moment when he heard the discussion and he wondered what was going on. One of the speakers wore the green badge of a C-rank level hunter and the necromancer wondered what a guy that important was doing in their guild. Suddenly, Dong-hoon was spotted and someone called out to him. It was the guild head who smiled wide and told the young man to come look at the big news that he had just heard. The head of the operation asked if our guy knew the pairing guild, the one established by Jipperang. The MC immediately replied that he did. Everyone in Korea knew the prestigious guild established by the Korean ranker Jipperang the Fine Bow. It looked like a group was interested in exploring a newly opened dungeon and they would need porters for the job. Besides, the pay was good too. The pay for that job was supposed to be 10 times the posted amount. Our dude was shocked and repeated the number in shock. The leader went on to say that they were even accepting E ranks, so he wanted to know if the MC was interested. To be fair, all the other requests were trash anyway, and Dong-hoon realized that there was an opportunity ripe for the taking. However, he wanted to take a look at what kind of dungeon it was first. The leader showed the map of the dungeon requested. It was a newly discovered dungeon near Paju, and it was quite tough. 5 teams had already failed to clear it and our dude was really alarmed. He could not believe there had already been 5 teams in there. The rank of the dungeon was also rather undetermined and they could both guess why. The teams that tried to clear it were all amateurs, but this time the famous pairing was going in. So, he did not see how anything could possibly go wrong. Plus, our dude was just a porter and he did not even have to fight. All Dong-hoon had to do was to work his part and get his money. It all sounded very easy. He took a moment to consider and assess his options. The tenfold reward was probably hazard pay for that kind of dungeon. If he was being honest with himself, he was also kind of mentally exhausted from that encounter with the orc the other day. However, the offer was way too tempting to pass up. Even the Dark Lord guy had said something in the interview. If he wanted to upgrade his rank faster, then he needed to go into dungeons above his level. There was no other way. The higher the rank, the bigger the risk. However, that also meant an abundance of opportunities and rewards. The MC desperately needed to grow. So, without any hesitation, he agreed to the terms of the contract. The guild master was elated and told the main character that he should not pass up a chance like this. Then, Dong-hoon asked when they would leave, and they were to leave a week from that moment, from Paju Station. So, the man got busy scribbling down his details on the application form. He then asked the head if he could take a week off just before the mission began. The man did not even hesitate and happily granted the leave, saying that he would even treat our guy to a meal soon. Ever the opportunist, the necromancer asked for 2 meals. His boss was a little hesitant, but he agreed to that too. With all of the paperwork worked out, it was time for our dude to get busy. Taking up his skull staff that bubbled up a huge wave of purple aura, he got busy summoning skeletons. Dong-hoon had a whole adventurous group of skeletons now, and working with them was nothing like the old days. He was so proud of the fact that all of the hard training had really paid off. The skeletons would keep growing stronger, so he told the first 3 skeletons to quickly hop to their position. If they kept up this kind of good work, then he would soon be able to become even a high ranker. He sure was aiming high, and he wanted to see everything that a D-rank skeleton could do. The skeletons got to work showing off their skills as they practiced hard in front of their master. They waved around their weapons, charging into wooden targets as they trained. The first 3 of course showed off their physical prowess, since by watching them, the main character could then assess just how much he had grown. The arrow shot by the skeleton soared through the air and it almost obliterated the bullseye. It was a masterpiece of a shot, and the necromancer could not help but watch in awe. This was the power of a D-rank skeleton. It was so impressive that it was almost as powerful as a C-rank skeleton. He knew his skeletons had gotten stronger, but he had seriously underestimated just how much their strength could grow. First things first, he needed to change all his training gear cause they were getting obliterated out there. The wooden scarecrows were useless now, and it looked like he was going to spend more money. However, spending money was nothing compared to how great it was that his skeletons had become stronger. The real problem now was the necromancer himself. Dong-hoon had to think up a solution of what he would do if the opponents targeted him instead of the skeletons. It would not matter then if his summons were strong, because everything would end the moment he was attacked. He did not want to be left running for his life like the last time with the orc. Suddenly, he noticed something. The mage skeleton was standing there staring at him. Suddenly, the purple gem on its staff began to glow, and our dude was shocked as the staff was kind of pointed in his direction. He did not expect a mutiny to happen so quickly. He stuttered and asked the skeleton what was wrong, as he was rather surprised by this sudden and bizarre behavior. Suddenly, the MC found himself energized and surrounded by green magic. He did not even need to go on a training montage because his mage skeleton had basically read his mind and protected him with a manifested shield. Dong-hoon was shocked to see the skeleton nodding and answering his thoughts. Then, all the skeletons responded like they could all hear his thoughts. The necromancer was impressed by the growth, since they used to only follow his orders, but now they could express their opinions. He was then surprised about the air shield, and that the mage had another skill outside of fireball. This was very important knowledge. Suddenly, the skeleton with the shield slammed down the shield, and our guy turned in surprise at the odd behavior. The shield guy just wanted some attention, it seemed, and his eyes glowed blue. It pointed towards all of the broken gear, and for a moment the necromancer was perplexed. The shield skeleton stood before our guy looking all menacing and serious. Suddenly, the sword skeleton saw the challenge and swung its weapon. As they fought, the shield skeleton noted arrows flying for its head. Bony 3 had joined in the fight. However, the shield skeleton easily lifted his weapon and blocked off all those troublesome attacks. The light of the sun illuminated the awe-inspiring picture of the skeleton standing proudly with its shield raised and all the arrows falling to the floor. Our guy was very impressed by this display of power, and he was happy to see that the shield was quite solid. The training practice went on, and the shield and sword skeleton continued to fight. If the Bone Knight helped out with the training, then the necromancer would not need to spend money buying extra equipment. This time, he asked Bony 2 to try attacking him, and the skeleton responded with surprise. However, Dong-hoon needed to test how safe the air shield was going to be. Bonehead 5, the mage, activated the skill called the air shield. Then, Bony 2 tossed its spear right at him, biting the hand that fed him. Our guy was low-key terrified, and he raised his hands to block his face. Fortunately, nothing hurt him even when he groaned slightly from the fear. When he opened his eyes, he grinned and thought the situation was not bad. Everything had worked out well, and he applauded the skeletons, who seemed really pleased about that. With that much confirmed, it was important to go right back to practicing. The skeletons go busy and fight hard, testing their weapons against the shield. They of course continued to test their weapons against each other as well, Bony 4 then switching to fight Bony 2 with his shield and Bony 2 attacking with his spear. The practice session was going well, and the glee-filled necromancer was happy to watch their power grow. Suddenly, a notification popped up, telling him that the strength of each bonehead had increased by 1. He was surprised to get this notification, and then he got a congratulations that told him the status of Widow had been unlocked due to his first growth. Our guy was surprised as he checked out his status window. He could now see the stats of his power, including the level of his strength, magic power, ability, technique, and constitution. Then, he realized that if the bony ones was generated, then it was generated for the others as well. It turns out that the answer was yes, and the necromancer could now see the individual strength of each of the skeletons in his control. He could see their strength, their magic power, their agility, technique, and constitution. He was very impressed by this fancy new upgrade and erupted in overjoyed awe. Thanks to the training of the skeletons, all of their stats were different, especially those of Bony 1 to 3 in comparison to Bony 4 and 5. All of our dude's efforts so far have not been in vain. Now, he just had to raise them comprehensively. So, he focused on all of the skeletons that stood at the ready. Smiling with pride and satisfaction, he decided to raise them so that they would become the world's strongest skeletons. So, the day passed and the training continued underneath the deep blue sky. Then, the day came and everyone had their backpacks on their back. Our dude even got a new fit and he looked pretty good. All dressed like a powerful necromancer. For the journey, he had packed with him a sleeping bag and more than enough emergency food. His position here was mostly to be a porter. He would be out of the way of the real damage and still make some substantial money. It was a good deal and he was ready to do what it took. So, Dong-hoon trudged forward with confidence, though he was sweating a little. Participating mercenaries were called over and told to follow the instructions. They must wait in front of the dungeon that they were planning to enter all at once. The dungeon was quite close to the Paju station and a dim energy could be seen at a radius of 200 meters. It looked pretty ominous. The hole that was inside the dungeon looked like an average and dun had been generated naturally. The other hunters were getting nervous just looking at the dungeon, and it looked like it would be a high difficulty dungeon. They had even heard that the thicker the color that was around the hole, the higher the chance that the dungeon would be more complex or difficult. Well, they were going in with pairing, so the other hunters shrugged off their fear that anything bad could possibly happen. And anyway, they just wanted to be done with this so that they could return home and eat some rice soup and saju. That idea sounded very good to them. However, our guy wondered if they truly could be considered safe just because they were adventuring with a big guild. It sounded like nonsense to him and he gritted his teeth in annoyance. There were lots of dungeons in this world and countless hunters that had gone missing inside of them. Some hunters faced beasts beyond their capabilities and had been dragged away by them. Some even piled high in a mountain of dead bodies. Many sacrifices and deaths that happened within the dungeons had been overshadowed by the luxurious spotlight of the high rankers. Despite all that, the necromancer tightened his grip on his bag, determined to go in and grow in power. He was going to put his life on the line and risk it all. Behind him was a lady, a sexy-looking lady. She called out to him and our guy, who seemed almost in a constant state of surprise, turned to her. Surprised. However, when he turned there was absolutely no one behind him. He was hearing ghosts now. Dong-hoon was sure that he had heard a voice, but there was no one there. Suddenly, someone said it was interesting and that they could feel that his energy was D rank and it was no more than that. That sort of roasting set our dude on the edge and he was nervous cause he still could not find who was talking. However, the person noted his E rank plate, and he was the porter on top of that. It was unnerving hearing someone talk about him and assess him when he could not even see them. Whipping around, the necromancer asked who they were, and he asked ever so politely if they would kindly tell him who they were since they were making him so nervous. However, the voice pointed out that they had asked first, asking our guy who he was. The stranger asked why the MC was busy hiding his ability from them, from pairing, and why he had decided to participate as a porter. It seemed this stranger had misunderstood something and he would happily clear up the misunderstanding if they could have the confidence to show their face instead of jumping to conclusions. Still, he could not believe that she had noticed such details, and he was low-key impressed and a little scared. Still, the pairing guild was full of high-rank hunters, so he did not see what difference a D or E rank hunter would make. Seeing our guy's concerned expression made the speaker even more suspicious of you, and he really was making an expression like a villain who had been found out. The speaker asked if he was a spy who received poor acting classes. He was taking pairing's intelligence capability too lightly, and did he really think that they would not notice that he was a spy sent from another guild? The lady then revealed herself as she walked with pride towards our guy. He was stunned to see the lady appear out of thin air. He was even more stunned to see that she had a golden plate on her side that was only given to S rank or higher. That meant that she was among the first rank of South Korea's 37 rankers. She was the Dark Empress, Gi-soil, Pairing's guild master, and Jipperang's only little sister. It was quite intimidating to see someone marching right up to him with a frown on her face. Thanks to her unique assassination ability, she was the #1 person that he should not make angry. Leaving aside how scary she was, our dude could not believe that he would get the chance to talk to someone with that rank or title that he admired. She looked stone cold though, and he quickly rushed to explain the misunderstanding. He was not a spy from another guild and he was barely a D rank hunter, to be honest. If it was a competing guild of pairing, it would make more sense for them to send a more talented hunter. It did not make sense for a competing guild to send someone like him. It was a good argument, a great argument by how dark she went at his response. Suddenly, the seemingly stone-cold hunter giggled in amusement. She laughed, holding up her hands and apologizing, saying that she was sorry. To be honest, she had only just been messing with him. Dong-hoon was shocked by this sudden personality switch and he was left gaping. He could not believe his ears. The beautiful lady stood with a cheeky smile while severely underdressed for adventuring. Dong-hoon could not understand at all. He could not fathom why someone in her class would pull a prank on a nobody like him. Boredom was a likely explanation. Others around were starting to recognize her too, and it was becoming rather bothersome. They wondered why the Dark Empress was there and where she had come out from. Suddenly, the necromancer had a thought and he wondered if the Dark Empress had done a background check on him. Certainly, training the skeletons like crazy might get the attention of rankers. Anyway, it was a God-given opportunity for a ranker to show him attention. She asked if he had gotten flustered because of her little sudden prank and she laughed in amusement. She apologized with her head bowed low, admitting that her little joke was rude. He was surprised about the apology, and she explained that she had just thought that it was interesting that a porter with an E rank badge would have the skills to house 5D ranked energies inside them. Then, our guy realized that she could sense his skeletons, and he laughed nervously about that. He did not have anything to say because she was right. Suddenly, he had a thought and his eyes widened. This meant that she had grasped his strength with energy detection. The sweet-looking girl was still a considerably powerful ranker, and she smiled with amusement. He could not let his guard down around her. Actually, her older brother had asked her to join the second team's expedition as the scout, so she was looking for a porter. Then there just so happened to be a suspicious-looking porter standing around, so of course she had approached. So, it was a job offer, and she asked if he would be interested in scouting. He could be a volunteer, but it could get a little dangerous though. With that much skill, he should be the most capable among the porters, and it did not look like he would get scared and run away. However, our dude was totally shivering with fear, and he wondered where she got that analysis from. However, Miss Girl soldiered on, and she boasted that she had an eye for people like him. As for the reward, she promised to double it. It was a dungeon expedition with a high ranker, and she even promised to give double the reward. That was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so she asked if he was interested, and he immediately agreed to it. He could not lose this kind of opportunity, especially not when he was working hard to level up. So, the dungeon rank. Dungeon difficulty started for me all the way to S. Dungeons were of course filled with all sorts of monsters, and the rank was not set by the system, so humanity had to subjectively rank and quantify it. The S ranker called White Shadow was asked the dungeon's rank in advance. However, it was unfortunate that there was no such method to reveal such a thing. One could only go in and check for themselves. If they were to give one tip though, it would be to check the brightness of the color that surrounds the dungeon. The darker it is, the more likely it is to be a higher level dungeon. Even this was not accurate, and the association had to set up a standard. If it could not be cleared, even with 5 or more hunters of the same rank, it was to increase the rank. If 5 or more high-ranked hunters participated but it could not be cleared, then the rank would upgrade once more, and the corresponding dungeon would become designated as an S-rank dungeon. In the end, it was a method that inevitably required someone's sacrifice. The unranked dungeon that the main character was about to enter was also something like that. However, they could not just send their main forces in, so they sent in a scouting team first. Thanks to that, Dong-hoon could smell the dungeon's air much faster than the other mercenaries. He got prepared as he entered the dungeon, bracing himself for what he would find inside. He was surprised to find a cave, with many ice daggers on the ceiling. Our dude paused when he saw the cave, but thankfully, he did not have problems with vision because of the luminescent pearls. Someone else pointed out the pearls, saying that if they took some of them then they could get a decent sum out of it. However, that line of thinking was halted immediately as another hunter reminded the opportunist that many hunters had died recklessly after touching items in dungeons. Everyone was a bit relaxed after entering the dungeon, and our guy could understand why. It was because almost everyone gathered had an high rank badge, except for Gisoil who had an S rank badge. Everyone was reminded not to get too relaxed and to prepare themselves. After all, they were inside a dungeon. First, Swift Blade and Little Fire would look around for one cycle, and they agreed immediately. Then the guide, Mr. Kang Sunwook, was called forward, and he responded immediately. He was to look for an exit and cover for their porter. The guide had already suspected he would be asked to do something like that, and she asked if he was confident. The guide smirked and said that if he was not confident then his alias would cry. A slightly unusual alias guide. It was a name given by the system for being exceptionally good at finding their way in dungeons. With that much confirmed, Soil turned back to keep marching into the dungeon, telling her team that they should hurry up and set off. Then, the guide smirked at our dude and asked if he was nervous. The necromancer was surprised by the question, but he admitted if he said he was not, then that would be a lie. The guide smirked and told the necromancer to keep being nervous, and he was very confused by such a statement. The guide explained for his information that the dungeon had more than 1 or 2 suspicious things about it. What he was saying was that the Dark Empress, who was a high ranker, was not telling him to stay nervous for nothing. This dungeon was excessively quiet, and the structure was simple. There was also a high chance that there would not be monsters. That was because if something lived in this small cave, then there should be a slight ringing or sound, or even vibrations. That meant that there might be something different hidden within the dungeon. Our guy was impressed that the guide could tell all of this before even properly searching the dungeon. He was not an experienced guide for nothing, and he pointed out that he had been in the dungeon business for many years now. All that the necromancer had to do was follow him, and they should try to find the exit for now, as ordered. They were moving in the opposite direction from the other hunters, but the white-haired necromancer figured that it should be fine. So, they stepped forward and kept going when someone suddenly said that they were anxious. It was the guide, and a heavy sweat had formed on his brow. There were no traps, no hints, no nothing, and they had been roaming the dungeon for quite a while now. It was concerning to the guide, and he asked our guy if his body was feeling heavy or if it was just him. The necromancer admitted that he did have the chills, and he asked the guide if he was sure that they should keep going. The guide was not sure, as this was the first time that he was feeling this way as well. It was a little difficult. Even meeting an ranker did not make the guide feel like this, and the necromancer was shocked to hear that. It felt like there was some sort of ridiculously powerful being down in the dungeons, and just thinking of that was making the guide feel nervous. Dong-hoon was a necromancer, so the guide said that he should summon something for now. If the situation came down to it, he should be able to save himself at least. Meanwhile, said necromancer was high-key panicking because he was just newly a D-class necromancer and he tightened his hold on his staff. The necromancer raised his staff and his adventurer's group of skeletons popped out. He summoned Bonehead 1 to 5 to assist him just in case things got wicked. His current energy level was 50 out of 100 for summoning all 5 at once, but he feared that he might need them. The guide was curious that he summoned skeletons and asked if the necromancer could summon anything better than skeletons when this was genuinely the best that he could do. He even said so because he could not kill himself over his limited skill. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise and all the skeletons braced up with their weapons at the ready. The necromancer panicked and asked the guide what was going on. The guide groaned as they all raised their arms to cover their faces, and he told our guy to keep walking as there was an open area ahead. Dong-hoon asked what the difference was if they reached the open area, and the guide snapped that he did not know, but he did feel the presence of several beings, and if someone was there then that meant it was habitable. It was a pretty good guess, but our guy was more worried about the presence that the guide talked about. The guide himself was not sure about it and said that it could be the previous tea or it could be monsters. At any rate, they could not just stick around to find out and they needed to move. So, they did move. The 2 hunters and the 5 skeletons hurried along as they marched forward, and the MC groaned that he could not even keep his eyes and mouth open. He was stumbling through the cavern with great difficulty, and the skeleton mage activated some magic and used the air shield, because our guy was really struggling. However, much to the shock of the skeleton mage, the air shield instantly shattered and the necromancer was left again with no protection. They were facing a seriously dangerous foe. Dong-hoon coughed out blood from the shock of it and cursed at Boney for being so bad at his one job. The pressure within the cave was enough to shatter a D-rank skill the moment it was cast. The skeleton was kind enough to try to support him and the MC was shocked to see just how far ahead the guide had already gone. At this rate, he would get left behind. None of the situations he found himself in made any sense, and a newly appeared dungeon in Paju turned out to be a super high difficulty dungeon that made even a high ranker feel tense. The necromancer so desperately wanted to live and becoming a ranker was just a dream and he needed to survive first to be able to achieve that dream. His shaky, stumbly legs pressed forward through the thick of the pressure. He was gasping and panting for breath with every step that he took with 2 skeletons underneath his arm, supporting him as he raced forward. He got a notification that he had reached the stage of an elderly man filled with resentment. It was such a stupid notification and he wondered what on earth that meant for him now. The stage of an elderly man with white hair filled with deep resentment was also oddly specific. His resume was apparently so deep that icy frost formed in his hair, and they had to enter the room and defeat this old man. Our guy then realized that this elderly man must be the boss of the dungeon, and he heard someone call out. Dong-hoon turned in surprise to see some people crouched nearby. It was a small group that rejoiced at finally seeing hunters inside, and they asked if the necromancer and the guide were part of the reinforcement team. They were surprised and wondered if these were the hunters who tried to avoid the pressure and reach this place. They were glad to see a purple rank badge on the guide, and the skeletons meant that the Mick was a necromancer, so they were sure that the 2 were part of a rescue team. They begged to be saved and to be helped to find a way out of there. They desperately needed food or water as well as they were so thirsty. The guide sighed and figured they might as well distribute the emergency food first. Dong-hoon got busy doing that, but he was also slightly resentful about the guide running forward and saving himself when they'd been struggling under pressure a few seconds ago. He understood that was how dungeons worked, but the harsh reality of it still sucked. At any rate, he got out the emergency rations and the water. The people happily drank water and they settled to eat the rations with joy. One wrong decision and our guy could have very easily ended up like these desperate people who got stuck in a dungeon. It was all very unfortunate. Now, the guide reminded the people they had rescued to please eat slowly, and he asked them to explain what had happened to them when they got to the dungeon. The guy who had agreed to them would speak on behalf of his team. He was the B-rank hunter of the group, and among the survivors there he was of the highest rank. This place was hell and he had been a hunter for some time, but he had never encountered such a strange dungeon. The strange part was what the guide wanted to hear more about. Look, there was no exit, and the hunters were stuck. The guide had to admit that was true, and from the starting point, no matter which direction they went, the cursed cave would always bring them to this door that housed the resentful old man. Then, they were tightly bound by the heavy aura and pressure, unable to leave. Ultimately, all they could do here was to challenge what was behind that door and nothing else. However, the clear condition was insane, and the hunters did not think it was possible for anyone to defeat that thing. An elderly man with white hair filled with deep resentment. That guy was insane and they thought that it was impossible to beat him. Whether it was a D rank, C rank, or even a B rank, they were like infants before that old man. However, if it was a high rank hunter, they were sure that the real thing could be different. Surely, they could get them out of this hell. However, the guide was speechless when faced with the happily sparkling rescue victims. However, Dong-hoon wanted to ask a question. If the boss was as strong as they said, then how come the 3 of them were still alive? It was a good question, and the B ranker smirked, saying that surprisingly, the old man did not kill people. He simply accepted challengers. The old man also conducted a sort of test. They were curious about the test, but the B ranker did not know the exact details. The old man just subdued them really painfully, agonizingly, and then clicked his tongue saying that they were not fit. Then, he would throw them back out. The necromancer was surprised to hear about a boss that did not kill, and he wondered what kind of dungeon this was. It was a little strange right then, and now that he thought about it, an old man meant that there was an old person there, so that meant that the boss they were fighting was still a person. It was the first time a dungeon boss had been human since the world changed, and our guy was very curious about that. A human boss. He did not think such a thing was even possible. This was the first time a dungeon boss was human since the world had changed, and everybody was shocked to hear this. A human dungeon boss was something that they did not even think was possible. Whatever the case was, they had to open that door and complete the mission to find an exit. However, he did not trust Kang Sunwook for this particular mission since he was a hunter that was specialized in guiding. The necromancer wondered how they should handle this situation when someone suddenly called Mr. Kang. It was the high-rank hunters, and they asked what they were doing here. The lady hummed thoughtfully as they all shared the information that they had gathered so far. She thought that they should go in right away. Judging by the auras, the survivors were not doppelgangers or traps. It did bother her though that the aura they could feel coming from the boss's room was so intense. However, they could not just sit around and wait for things to escalate. The survivors rejoiced at seeing such a talented and confident S-rank hunter, celebrating their salvation, and saying that they were moved. They recognized the Dark Empress from the Pairing Guild, and from now on they would be sure to bow toward the Pairing Guild headquarters every morning. Porters and survivors were asked to stay outside while the S and A-ranked hunters took care of the situation. Indeed, an S-ranker stood in a completely different realm from an high-ranker, and not only was the Dark Empress an S-ranker, but she was also ranked among the top 1,000 high-rankers. She tied up her hair in preparation to get serious, and she told everyone that it was time to go and that they should prepare themselves. So, she grabbed a hold of the door and it opened with the high-ranked hunters stepping inside and preparing to do battle. The door closed behind them and Dong-hoon took a seat outside, chilling and waiting for the battle to be done. There was a loud scream from inside of the room which greatly surprised the necromancer. Suddenly, the door was tossed open and both the rankers were tossed outside like trash. The redhead was even screaming about how much pain he was in. The talented lady followed soon after and was thrown out as well. She flew out of the room and her back hit the wall. She groaned in pain and gritted her teeth. The door then very carefully slid closed and Dong-hoon could not help but gape in shock and disbelief at the outcome of that match. It had not even been 10 minutes since the talented hunters went inside. For an S-rank to be incapacitated this quickly, that meant the boss they were facing within was great. The S-ranker was furious too, growling in rage about getting called not fit. She called for the porter and our guy answered immediately. She asked for an advanced level potion from his back because she was going back in. He could not believe what she was saying, but it was a determination that he found burning in her eyes. She still wanted to go in after getting beaten up like that. He asked if she was sure, and she said the survivors were right. The old man would not kill her and would only subdue her painfully. So, the Manga gave the skilled fighter the healing potion which she accepted gratefully. She was determined now and she had to let that old man know. Then, he would see if she truly was not fit. Dong-hoon had no idea what she was talking about and thought that particular phrasing was used when a master was seeking a disciple to train. If that was the case, then the old man's resentment could possibly be from not finding a suitable disciple with the talents that he was searching for. The S-rank fighter drank up the healing potion and she was fired up once more to try again. So it was that Gisoil's infinite challenge began and she strode back into the chamber. She got tossed out almost as fast too. However, that did not discourage her and she walked in again, just to get tossed out again. It soon became a fast repeating cycle of the hunter walking in and getting tossed out with even more bruises than before. Her determination was unbending, but her bravery was almost becoming foolish. One could not blame her for trying though, as they could not escape without defeating the boss. The hunter lay on the floor panting for breath after getting kicked out once again. Then she raised her head and claimed that the situation was so darn infuriating. She wondered just what the guy's problem was and what he wanted from her. That horrid cheeky old man. She had thought that he only mastered swordsmanship, but apparently, he was also good with a spear. However, she refused to give up and she was on her feet again, growling that they would see who would win between the two of them. Our guy watched her determination as she walked in and got tossed out for what seemed like the 100th time. An entire day passed with that repeated madness and even her will bent a little. Dong-hoon was exhausted just sitting there waiting for her to beat the boss, but that was not even the end of that nightmare. The second day passed, and then the third, and then the fourth day passed as well. E2S did not stop challenging and going mad in the process. At some point, she screamed in hatred and pointed at the door in a rage. She had no idea what the old man's deal was. He could use magic too. She could not see how anyone could clear this. This situation was big trouble. Even if Jipperang came to rescue her, the problem would ensue. He had a feeling that even two, no 5 rankers, might not defeat the old man. Alright, Goyle would finally admit it. The old man was strong. Really strong. However, as long as she was alive, she would keep challenging him. Dong-hoon was impressed at the mindset of top rankers who refused to stop even in the face of defeat. However, he looked down at the staff in his hand. Unable to clear the dungeon, the survivors began to struggle. Moreover, our guy was frustrated too. He could not just wait there doing nothing, and come to think of it, all the hunters here had gone through that door and come back in an attempt to defeat the boss. Dong-hoon was the only one who had not gone inside the house. The hunters noticed that he stood and the female hunter turned in surprise and asked what was the matter. Finally, the resident porter worked up the courage to say that he would like to try going in. The S-ranker was surprised to hear that, and that a porter wanted to enter a dungeon where even a high ranker had failed continuously. They had thought that he was just a novice necromancer that could only summon skeletons, and they were shocked to hear this from him. One of the angry S-rankers stepped forward and told the Mick to act like a porter and just quietly carry his bags. He growled that he should know his place and even somehow reached for his sword for some reason. It seemed like his pride was threatened. Dong-hoon started to sweat buckets watching the guy approach with violence in his eyes, and Gi-soil commanded that he stop immediately. Meanwhile, she just wanted to know why our guy wanted to go in, and she asked if it was because he did not trust her. The Gi-soil asked if the problem was that he did not trust her, and for some reason, all the hunters had gathered together looking rather menacing and insulted for some reason. However, that was not the issue at all. According to the original contract, he was a porter and he could not voice his opinions on dungeon exploration. He was well aware of that, so she then wondered why the porter suddenly wanted to challenge the boss. The old man said that he was looking for someone fit, and he figured that the old man's resentment might be related to finding a worthy disciple, and a worthy disciple meant potential, so they did not necessarily need to be perfect either. Put another way, it was likely that the old man was not talking about his current skill level. So, he was saying that he wanted to make the old man his master rather than defeat him. That may be the hidden clear condition, and he just wanted to test his theory. Hidden pieces were sometimes something that featured inside dungeons, and sometimes dungeons had alternative ways to clear them. A hidden piece was something the lady pondered. Assuming our guy's theory was right, then how was he planning on possibly becoming the old man's disciple? She asked if he somehow had more potential than her, and it kept getting more and more tense, with the rankers somehow taking his offer to help as a challenge to their power. He highly doubted that he would somehow overpower them, but he really wanted to try anyway. Soil pointed out that he did not deny the accusation that he thought he might have more potential than she did. Dong-hoon groaned and quickly said that she had the wrong idea. She stared at him for a hot minute, and then finally he yelled out about pain. Everyone had experienced pain apart from him. Everyone else had experienced it but him. He felt like he was the odd one out here. Besides, the other fighters were taking a break right now. The S-ranker smiled. She smiled and turned away, saying that he had the look in his eyes that she had been searching for, and he was finally showing her his true colors. She had known it from the beginning, and she smiled. He asked what she was, and she smiled when she told him that he was suspicious. He had the eyes of a wolf on the prowl. So, he was after the dungeon's reward, and she suspected that he was hoping for some fortuitous encounter during the raid. Dong-hoon narrowed his eyes as he reasoned that this person should be a fortune teller, not a ranker. He could not tell how she was able to read him so quickly just by looking at him. However, she swished away and gave him permission to try it. There was no other solution anyway, and she wanted a break just like he had said, so it worked well for her. Besides, she was not one to talk since she had already failed multiple times. Our dude was thrilled that he was getting a chance, but he was told that he would only be given one chance. As he could see, their emergency rations were running out and the rescue team was not coming. Meaning, they needed to clear the dungeon as soon as possible before they all starved to death. Dong-hoon bowed in thanks at the opportunity that he had been provided, and the high rankers just looked away like a pair of frustrated snobs. Alright, it was finally time for the MC to show these guys just what he was made of. He stepped forward, one foot in front of the other as he reached for the door to the boss room. He could challenge this stage by opening the door, and the system asked if he wanted to open the door. So, he stepped forward and opened the door. The stage was, as said earlier, an elderly man with white hair filled with deep resentment, a resentment so deep that icy frost formed in his hair. The challenge was to defeat the old man. Our guy raised his hands to block out the bright light that suddenly flooded the area. Inside the room, smoke danced before him. Gingerly, Dong-hoon stepped forward into the strange place when he suddenly felt an immense pressure fill the room. He fell to his knees and he was shocked when suddenly the old man appeared, complaining about the shabby girl that kept coming in, and now they had sent in an even more pitiful fellow. The old man's resentment was deep, and he said this one was not even worth looking at, and that he should just get rid of the MC. His eyes shone with blue light, and Dong-hoon found his body filled with a lot of pain. He was now facing the memory of a cursed soul. Hidden condition achieved. This was the hidden condition for unique authority, cursed necromancer. Our guy's eyes widened in shock as an encounter with a cursed soul's memory activated. A necromancer ultimately commands the dead, and they have just encountered a cursed soul with strong determination. They had now acquired the skill of memory recreation, an S-rank skill. It felt like the necromancer was dreaming of having suddenly unlocked an S-rank skill of all things. He pushed himself to his feet and he was now using his S-rank skill. He could not believe that he was using the skill, and he was hesitant when he pushed to his feet. Come to think of it, the old man said that he would get rid of him, but he was not doing anything at all. This surprised the hesitant necromancer, and the skill informed him that recreating the memory of the cursed soul master of all techniques would transport our dude shortly. Suddenly, a bright light shone and temporarily blinded our guy. He raised his hands to cover his face and stumbled forward when a drop of snow landed on his hand. He opened his eyes and was surprised to see that he had been transported to a land of snow. There was snow everywhere, and the old man, the old master, stood in the snow. He mumbled in anger, wondering why there were no suitable candidates. It was too wasteful to just leave it behind. What a meaningless life the old man lived. He had worked so hard to get to where he was right now, yet now he was told to throw it all away. Such a thing was what the old man considered unacceptable as he stared desolately at the land of falling snow. Meanwhile, Dong-hoon was busy marveling at the fact that he had been transported to another world. He looked around in awe that the other world really did exist, and this one was covered in ice and snow. Suddenly his eyes widened as he felt an intense feeling fill his head. These were the old man's emotions and memories, and the old man sighed that he had lived quite an interesting life. A swordsman, a spearman, an assassin, an archer, a mage, a buffer, a healer, and more. The old man had many things in his life. Once a person knew how to master the flow of Kai, all techniques became one. The old man who transcended any and all lived for a very long time. However, even Kai could not stop his aging. He stood in the snow contemplating how drinking cold water now felt like swallowing poison. The one light air now felt like it was crushing him and aching to kill him. It was painful, agonizing, and he was desperately thirsty. However, the old man refused to just die like that. Dying now would be too unfair, and his eyes burned with passion and life. The old man fell to his knees in great sorrow and openly lamented his very difficult time. He just wanted to find one single disciple who he could pass down his ability to. How could there be no one with enough talent? The idea of a single successor with nothing more than his meaningless greed. He just wanted a student to appear before him. The old man could not go on like this, and a tear fell from his eyes to the snow. The old man went as far as to say that he would even sell his soul as he pressed his hand into the snow. Just to leave behind his complete self, he would do anything. And he pressed his face into the snow with pain. The skill recreation had ended and our dude got transported back to the dungeon. He groaned as they landed once more in the room. Dong-hoon gasped as he opened his eyes. They were once again back in the dungeon. He looked around at the smoke in the area and he groaned as the pressure returned and he fell to his knees. The master of all techniques was now staring at him. It looked like the necromancer had landed back in the dungeon, and the suffocating feeling had returned. However, his teeth clenched in a grin as he could now finally see some hope in his endeavors. The old man acknowledged our guy now and he asked if the young lad had the audacity to peer into his soul. Fortunately, the old man found that rather interesting. The master was now curious about the necromancer and he responded that he did peer into his soul. He pushed to his feet as he knew that the old man was indeed looking for a disciple. If someone could inherit his vast power and knowledge, then it had to be the necromancer. However, other than being somewhat interesting, the old man believed that Dong-hoon had nothing else of value and that he was worthless, lacking everything to contain his hardcore techniques. Our dude once again found himself forced to his knees and he groaned in pain, barely holding himself up with the staff. He shouted out to the old man, respectfully calling him elder and saying that if the old man continued like this, he would never find a disciple. He would remain a ghost forever, unable to resolve his resentment. People would remember him as a stubborn ghost filled with obstinacy and bullheadedness. The old man of course got offended and called our dude an insolent brat, and that he had spared ants like him with his boundless generosity. He wondered if he needed to break one of the porter's legs for him to come to his senses. Still, Dong-hoon begged for the old man to listen. The master had mastered every technique and the people of this world struggled to master it even in their lifetime. The old man thought that such a thing was impossible and that the world was vast and that time was long. Surely there would be another genius like him in time. However, Dong-hoon took the opportunity to point out that the woman who had come in earlier had such great potential, and that woman was one of the strongest in their world. The old man could not believe that and was genuinely shocked. Considering that a ranker like Gisoil was his ultimate goal, the old man's reaction kind of stung. The old man seemed to be contemplating everything. Anyway, the old man had at least taken the bait and then he yelled that it was impossible. He could not believe that a talented female fighter was one of the strongest when her skill level was nowhere near his. He was sure that our guy was trying to trick him. However, the necromancer just asked the old ghost to look into his eyes, asking if those looked like the eyes of a dishonest fellow. He knew the old man could tell at once that he was not lying, and the master was shocked by this bizarre truth. He thought it was very unfortunate that things came to be like this. Then, Dong-hoon appealed to the elder, saying that if no one met his standards, then he could use him. The old man was curious about that suggestion, and the necromancer pleaded to the old master to pass on his abilities to him. The old man asked if the necromancer was asking to become his disciple. The old master thought of the youngster as insolent, but now he had also proven to be rather shameless and he would rather teach garbage than teach the likes of him. The old master knew his worth. However, Dong-hoon was persistent and he said that he was not asking him to teach him directly. He was not going to use any abnormalities. He opened up his unique abilities and summoned a skeleton. He summoned more than one, saying that if it was this powerful elder then surely He could see the potential of his small group of armed skeletons. The old man stared at the manifested skeletons, and our guy really hoped that the old man could see that growing skeletons would have limitless potential. With such potential, then surely it would be something too good to resist. The old master noted that all of the skeletons had different unique abilities and wielded different weapons. It would be easier for him to teach all of them. If he wanted a single successor, then he did not need to worry. Even if all of these grew, then Dong-hoon would be the one to inherit it all. The young man asked what the old man thought, saying that this undead improved. They don't feel pain, so they will have more endurance than anyone and be more challenging than anyone because they are fearless. The old man stayed studying the skeletons in front of him, assessing them and considering his options. He frowned with narrowed eyes and an icy gaze as he considered all the skeletons before him. Then he suddenly turned away, almost like he was dismissing them. The MC was still struggling under the pressure and he worried that the old man was still not impressed. However, the old man then said that it was amusing and ironic. The successor that he had sought was not human but undead. The potential of those skeletons was truly immense. The skeletons stood, poised for battle, and the old man noted that they must have been exceptional warriors in life. He had always wanted such disciples and only now was he gaining such. Teaching more than one was tricky, but the old man figured that he could accept such a compromise. So, he turned to our dude and the notification informed him that he had fulfilled the hidden condition. Our guy was elated as the hidden condition was fulfilled for the man filled with deep resentment. The old man decided to trust the necromancer's words. He would trust the determination in his eyes, so he asked the young man to promise him that no matter what trials came, he would inherit all that he possessed. The old master asked the Mick to promise that he would leave a mark of his new master somewhere in the world. Dong-hoon had finally been recognized by the master of all techniques and he struggled to say that he would not miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He would inherit the power no matter what. The master then smiled, revealing an almost kind and happy face. Our guy received congratulations and noticed that he had cleared the stage of the elderly man with white hair filled with deep resentment. When Dong-hoon opened his eyes again, he was indeed surprised to find himself in a place that did not look like the dungeon. He was instead lying on a bed with great confusion in his eyes and a new change of clothes. Someone greeted him, noting that he was finally awake and he turned to acknowledge them. He asked who the person was out of temporary blindness, but that long black hair was recognizable anywhere. It was of course Gi-soil who seemed to be watching him with a serious expression on her face. Memories started coming back to the necromancer really quickly as he wondered where he was because it looked very much like a hospital. Then, the S-ranked hunter decided to formally introduce herself this time, saying that she was Gi-soil, the vice guild master of the Parent Guild. She was also known as the Dark Empress, but he already knew all that and he was wondering what her dark self with her dark expression was doing in his room. He could not remember what happened after clearing the dungeon, and he reasoned that he must have lost consciousness. The vice guild master admitted to her surprise that the boss was clearable when she had tried and failed many times. She never would have thought that a porter of all people would be the one to clear it. It was clear that fact really seemed to bother her for some reason. Her expression was clearly bothering Dong-hoon because he hitched his blankets high in fear like she had come to assassinate him. He asked nervously why she was staring at him like that, and Soil did him no favors because she kept glaring like he was a criminal. The necromancer went on to say that he was just curious. He had no idea why the vice guild master of a major guild would be in his hospital room in the first place. She was silent for a hot minute, and then she admitted that it should be obvious. She was really curious about what had happened there. More than anything, she wanted to know how he had cleared a dungeon that she had struggled with so much. She also wanted to know what reward he had gotten for clearing it. She asked if he had really become the old man's disciple and so on. Her questions were definitely valid. The dungeon was hers and he had only been given a single opportunity. As their emergency rations had dwindled and there was no rescue team in sight, they needed to clear the dungeon as soon as possible. From her perspective, our guy was just a random guy who came along and stole her moment. A more violent ranker might have already beheaded him for stealing their prey, even though that sounded a bit much for a well-developed society. Still, our guy was nervous and his hands curled into his blankets. Noticing this, the S-ranker asked what he was thinking so deeply about. He then said that before he answered her questions, he wanted her to tell him what the news articles were saying about the dungeon exploration since he needed to get all his facts in order. The Dark Empress acknowledged what he was worried about, but she said that there was no need for that. They reported that the Pairing Guild's advanced team successfully cleared the dungeon and had all the survivors sign confidential agreements. This meant that the public had no idea that Dong-hoon was the one to clear the dungeon, much to his relief. He bowed in thanks for her consideration of him. Then, she said that he acted more mature than he looked. Most hunters would kill for a chance to show off their achievements to the world, but he just smiled and said that his safety came first. Safety was first and safety was second. Then, there was no need to thank him. This was also a matter of pride for the Pairing Guild as no one would believe that a porter was the MVP of the expedition, an E-rank mercenary no less. The necromancer fell silent at that part and noted that they were keeping it a secret since it was embarrassing. If our guy was to reveal the truth to the world, he might get discreetly dealt with. Then, he called the Dark Empress again, and she said the porter could ask any questions. Then, he asked how long he was unconscious, and she replied that it had been 3 days since he came out of the dungeon, and he could not believe how long he'd been knocked out. Still, he had gotten a fortuitous opportunity thanks to Gi Soil. However, he should not babble about the rewards as that could also put him in great danger. He really appreciated her for thinking of him, but honestly, he was still not sure what was what. He had not even figured out the rewards yet. He might need some time to answer her questions properly. She was not very amused by this response, but he did beg for some time to figure things out, and she hummed and thought. It wasn't like he was going anywhere anyway, as he reminded her, since he knew that no hunter in the world could ever escape the eyes of the Dark Empress. Of all the possible titles they could have given her, that one was the most cheesy, and she seemed to think that, especially when he said it. Still, she said that she appreciated it and that she would come back once he had sorted things out. The necromancer thanked her for everything, and the Dark Empress stepped out. This left him falling to the bed with a sigh of relief. Life had been pretty spectacular of late, with awakening after 3 years of nothing, meeting a rancor, and the strange dungeon on top of that. Plus, he could end up on the wrong side of pairing if he was not careful. On the other hand, he could build a nice and healthy relationship with the guild and the handsome man that ran the show. Suddenly, our guy got a notification, and he was asked to check his clear rewards. He then recalled that he had fainted and never checked the rewards. So, he got busy accepting the rewards and received a ton of them. His energy level had permanently increased by 20, and he had acquired the skill teaching of all techniques, which was S rank. He had gained yet another S rank skill, and he was very happy about it. The status window popped up and he could only summon skeletons, but he did have the ability to subdue his opponents using fearsome spirits and toxic substances. He had gained 2 new S-rank skills from the new mission, and he grinned with joy, thinking that this amount of luck was incredibly insane. So, this was why the veterans were also obsessed with dungeons. He had a memory recreation which could read the memory of the dead, and our guy wondered what that could be since it looked like a hidden skill. He was glad that he could read the old man's memories thanks to this skill, but he could not say that he was impressed. Oh well, he was sure that he would find another use for it someday, so he checked out his other fancy and shinier skills. The teaching of all techniques went into more detail, and it consumed a lot of energy to summon the master of all techniques for 60 minutes. Then the master could pass on knowledge, and the cooldown period was 24 hours. Only he would be able to perceive the master after he was summoned. Our guy was silent as he read through all that. Then, he suddenly hopped to his feet, grabbed his bag, and left. The little liar had said that he would never run away, but now he was in an open field that was far from the hospital. He was busy contemplating his hand, and then he waved it around to summon his new master. Using skill teaching of all techniques, an S-rank skill, he summoned the huge glowing ball, and with the hyper-focus, he was able to bring forth the master of all techniques. The master said that it was about time, and he smiled and called our guy a brat. Calling Dong-hoon a brat, the young lad smiled upon seeing his master, and then he got smacked on the head by the angry old man. Of course, his master had beef, because this student had promised that he would inherit everything, but he was only calling him just now. They had already wasted so much time that they could have used it for training. Our dude, however, was more focused on how much that punch hurt. His new master did not care and complained that if he were that lazy, then he would not be able to keep up. Then, the necromancer asked the cranky teacher to wait a moment. He had called the teacher as soon as he regained his senses, and besides that, the old man used to be incapable of physically influencing their world. However, now the old man was throwing around punches like it was nothing. As the old master expected, the young lad still had a long way to go. To think that his expression would be so easy to read. It was both laughable and disappointing. The master revealed that the boy was connected to him mentally. The necromancer thought that his master should have trouble inflicting pain on other people. However, since he had been called, the master wanted to get started immediately, as he did not have time for an explanation even if his student wanted them. His student sulked, but he hoped to do it and got busy summoning the skeletons. However, the old master said that there was no need for that. He was going to decide first what the student was going to learn that day. He clearly understood the talent of those 10, however, the problem was the necromancer himself. Dong-hoon was shocked to hear this, and he grappled internally, wondering why he was the problem and if the old man intended to teach him too. The old man did indeed intend to do so, and he asked the young lad if he understood why he was called the master of all techniques. He was given that very fancy nickname after learning and perfecting countless talents. He wielded many deadly weapons with expertise and was renowned far and wide. The necromancer really thought that the old man had only 10 things to teach. It was laughable. Everything outside of that 10 was up to the young lad to learn. And the old man smiled wickedly. The young lad was shocked to hear this, and he wanted to post. He complained that his talent was trash, but the old man coughed loudly, slamming his foot on the floor. He demanded silence from his annoying student, saying that since the young lad had made that promise with him, then he just had to inherit his mastery. If the young lad could not achieve that, then he would just have to try until he could. The old man could use one of his arts to make trash comparable to a genius, the trash in question being our guy. It was a good thing that the old man could exercise physical influence on him too, because he had a good mind to beat his student senseless for every failure. The whole situation was very fortunate for the old man. There were some arts that he created, but he had never gotten the chance to use them. Hardened meridians can be opened with Kai, and Dong-hoon's physique should improve with massages for 300 days. It would be painful, but he had noticed that the young lad was quite tenacious, so he dismissively believed that his young student would be fine. The necromancer did not share the positivity at all. He looked quite ill as he tried to remind his new teacher that he was totally still human here. He was the one who owned the body, so he had no idea why the old man was happily making guesses. The necromancer did not feel like his heart was ready for such intense training. He had only come out of the hospital. The old man of course did not care and yelled for his student to be quiet. He asked if our guy even knew how many had wanted and begged to learn from the old master in the world that he was from. He was going to pass down the grand technique of the celestial artisan. It was the art that he created in his last years after thinking much about it. Dong-hoon wondered why the old man had never used such a technique if he had it. After all, it was a technique that could turn trash into genius. The old master could clearly see what his student was thinking. However, for this technique, the old master would need to use his life energy as payment. It would be a great sacrifice to change a boneless disciple and to increase their talent. However, after doing such an incredible feat, the master's body would have melted and disappeared. The young lad then asked how things were different now, and the master shrugged that he was already dead, so it probably would be okay. It was a very comfortable way of thinking, and it did not really affect our guy, so he went along with it. Then, the young necromancer asked his new teacher why he had not just taken any of the others who had tried to challenge him and used that technique on them, since he had also been dead in the dungeon. Of course, the old man responded to that question with a very violent punch. Dong-hoon groaned, asking why he had gotten hit this time. The old man glared, saying that even when he told the young lady something, he did not properly understand its meaning. The old man had already said that the technique was the kind to turn trash into genius. It would have no meaning if it was not used on trash. So, the old man stylishly reminded our dude that he belonged in a garbage can, as he explained that the technique was only useful if the target was at the level of food waste. Dong-hoon was of course offended by this very blatant and downright rude conclusion. No one wanted to get called food waste of all things. The technique would not work on people who were not at a high level. After all, their bodies had already been influenced by other energies. Compared to all-powerful people like Goyle, the necromancer's body was very clean and very weak. Although he had the ability to summon the dead, that did not change his body much. He was the perfect vessel. Not only that, but this was only the second best way. After all, born geniuses were more impressive than fabricated ones. The man had originally intended to find a more impressive prospect than our guy. The student pondered all he had heard, and although the master's words were harsh, he recognized that they were good words nonetheless. If it was not just the skeletons, if there was a chance that Dong-hoon could also get stronger, then he was willing to take it. It was like killing two birds with one stone. The old master grinned and asked if he was ready.
What will happen next? To find out, do like, share and subscribe to our channel. You can also give us supers because your one support motivates us a lot to make such type of content. Thanks for watching. Sayonara.